Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Tyrone back with Tech Life. And in today's video, I wanted to give you guys my end of year coverage comparison. I do one of these every year, or I have done one of these every year so far that I've been running the channel. And at that time, when I make these videos, I usually give you guys my outlook and predictions. And then we talk a little bit about coverage of each individual carrier and where I think they stand as of today. Now, I don't go in too much detail because that'll just take too long if we start zooming in and checking every inch of the map. So I just try to give you guys an overall summary of who I think is the best right now and who I think has the better chance of catching up to another carrier in terms of square miles of LTE. So it's been known for a very long time now that Verizon has the perception and they have the largest 4G LTE network. That's the perception that they have in the mind share in the markets. And that is what most third-party apps such as RootMetrics is what I'm using here also show. Now, the carrier's coverage maps I think have been, I think those aren't accurate, haven't been for a very long time. I just think the crowdsourced maps are more accurate because it's coming from actual users that are in the specific areas where people are checking. The coverage maps that the carriers use is just a painted coverage map showing coverage in an area, but we don't know if there's actual coverage because no user has ever been there with their phone to check it out. Where with the crowdsourced maps, if you see that there's coverage in that area, that means that a user has been there and mapped those areas to have coverage. So that's why in this video, I'm using RootMetrics. I know a lot of people use other maps, that is fine. But for this purpose, I'm using RootMetrics. So the first carrier I'm looking at here is Verizon. And as you can see, they have a very large coverage. There's still the orange is the 3G. So there's still some areas that have 3G and they will turn to no coverage and no service after the CDMA has been shut down. But that will be up to Verizon on how they handle that. They're going to have to fill in those areas. And again, keep in mind, this map may not be 100% up to date. So the area that shows here in orange, 3G, may have already been filled in with 4G LTE. There was just nobody there to report that or map that coverage. So also keep that in mind. But that is a pretty large, there's a lot of orange on this map. So I do predict that some of these areas are still showing 3G, or they have a 4G LTE tower, but it just can't reach far enough. So the phone drops to 3G because CDMA can reach further into these areas, and Verizon will just have to fill that in with another 4G LTE tower. But again, we have to leave that up to Verizon because they are the ones that are going to shut off the CDMA, and they are going to be the ones to have to fix this. So again, Verizon does have the largest 4G LTE coverage in the United States, has been so for a very long time. They have just very aggressively focused on that since 2010, where everybody else was doing something different. Sprint was doing WiMAX. T-Mobile was still in between HSPA 42 and LTE. At&T was doing HSPA 21. They never went to 42, but AT&T at that time was slowly moving over to LTE. T-Mobile didn't have enough funds at that time, but then they did end up gaining some funds. So they pushed that towards upgrading the network. And then they also gained Band 4 from AT&T as well when the merger was called off. So that's when they both transitioned to LTE, but they did it at a later time. So there was about a 2-year gap. By the time AT&T and T-Mobile, if I recall correct, got to really going in on LTE and upgrading sites and getting urban and metro markets going, Verizon was already at around 150 million pops of LTE nationwide. That's how far advanced Verizon has been even at that time. And then Sprint, of course, they were always the last. They didn't even want to fully transition from WiMAX until a later time. And I think that their transition happened in 2012, and then Network Vision fully got rolling in in 2013. Now, the thing that I do want to point out, and this is where my prediction begins, I do think that Verizon is going to slow their network growth starting in 2020. I've been speaking with a couple of contacts. I think that Verizon starts shifting their capital investment more towards market-based performance. And what I mean by that, of course, 5G. I think they triple their 5G markets in 2020. I think the goal is to triple, and if not, even exceed that goal. So I'm thinking they're going to be right around 120 to 150 markets with millimeter wave. I think that's where the capital goes next year. And then, of course, they still have to modernize a lot of sites that they have out there in the wild. They built a large network. So now the investment funds are getting so big because they have so many cell sites to tend to. There's cell sites in the middle of nowhere that they have to upgrade. And also, of course, they have to keep a lookout in case they go down or anything like that. So that in itself is already a large investment. Then, they're going to start densifying even more, getting the LTE network better. There's a lot of congestion that they haven't really gotten under control just yet. And then also the DSS technology, dynamic spectrum sharing. That's another transition into 5G where Verizon will spend heavy as well. They want to be the leader in the 5G. So I personally think, this is just my opinion, after speaking with a few people, I think 80 to 85% of their capital investment next year goes towards 5G. Why do they slow down the network expansion? They already have a very large network at this point. I think a few fill-in sites, we will still see that happening, but I don't think they go all out as AT&T will next year. AT&T still has to uphold the first net contract, so I think AT&T goes, metal to the floor all out next year, and I think next year is going to be AT&T's biggest chance to close the coverage gap with Verizon. There's still a coverage gap of, I want to say roughly off the top of my head, about 500,000 square miles between AT&T and Verizon at this point. I think next year AT&T closes a huge chunk of that coverage and they start virtually matching Verizon toe to toe. Where does that leave T-Mobile? That all depends on the merger. But again, the merger is going to cause for distractions, integration, and such. So next here, we have AT&T's network. And as you can see, they have more of that orange. Sorry about that. They have more of that orange than Verizon. And that's because a large part of their network has always been HSPA and is still HSPA only, which they are going to get to those sites starting next year and then into 2021. And those will just have to be upgraded, of course, based on the first net, because they present coverage in those areas, but it's not LTE. So that also could be a reason why they are so far behind. So maybe they do have, toe-to-toe coverage with Verizon, but it's just not LTE at this point. So you could be in one of these areas with Verizon and you're getting LTE, and your friend that's with you has AT&T and he's getting HSPA. His phone still works, but it's just not modernized LTE network. They're still on old legacy HSPA sites. So they'll still be able to make phone calls, text, check social media in certain instances. I've seen HSPA traveling. It's not, it doesn't hold a lot of capacity, but in some highways and interstates, huge capacity isn't needed. So I was still able to pull 10, 15 megabits per second on HSPA, which everything worked fine. Latency was a bit higher, of course, but for the average consumer that's not into speed testing or anything like that, it's just going to work like their phone normally does on LTE. So again, that's another thing. By 2022, AT&T wants to shut down HSPA. That's going to have to be up to them again to fill in those coverage gaps, and then also convert most of those sites, if not all, by that time, to LTE. I do think, I want to say this in my personal opinion, I do think there will be some spots left behind, because they just can't get to all of them, of course. So when they do the shutdown and you move from an HSPA phone to LTE, you may go to those areas and receive no service at first until the carrier can either optimize a nearby site or they have to build a new site to fill in coverage in those areas. That's a very close thing that the network RAN team has to manage, and that's just something that they're going to have to look at over time. I think it's going to happen to some people. They will have experienced coverage in one part and then get moved over to a phone that doesn't have HSPA, and then all of a sudden they have no service. So those are just some things that the carriers will have to iron out themselves. That's out of our control. You know, the techies, the hardcores, the average consumer that watches the channel, that's 100% out of our control, and that's up to the companies. They just have to fix it. They should already know those areas exist. They should already be planning ahead of time. But again, that's up to those companies. So again, At&T, very large network at this point too. They have expanded up to, I want to say now it's a little over 50,000 square miles of LTE with the first net expansion. There's a huge expansion going on currently in Maine, also in Nebraska. The reason Verizon's not actively in those areas because they have already expanded there, but there's a lot of expansion coming from At&T there in the next year. So be on the lookout, definitely. Next, honestly, I'm not even going to look at Sprint. Just a quick look. I mean, as you can see, their network is just so small. You see a lot of red. That's all 3G. So 9 times out of 10 in those areas, you're going to be roaming on T-Mobile. So let's take a look at T-Mobile. So T-Mobile has done a quite a large expansion since, I want to say, 2014, 2015. They've added 25,000 towers and, you know, about a million square miles of LTE. I think they're closing in on that number now in just the last roughly 5 years. So the last I checked, they cover around 1.7 million square miles of LTE with their current network, the way it stands. And with Band 71, it's going to allow them to, of course, expand even further into areas where they didn't have the low band, Band 12, that they use on most of their network now as we know it. Now, of course, T-Mobile is dealing with a lot. They're trying to be a nationwide carrier, so they have to expand, spend money on that, spend money on 5G. They still have to upgrade and modernize sites. There's a huge chunk of, for instance, for an example, Oklahoma City. There's a huge chunk of the network that is not running the latest LTE advanced technology. Although most people say as long as carrier aggregation is involved, that's already LTE advanced. But now to future-proof, to run more efficient, you want to add 4x4 MIMO, 256 QAM, 64 QAM, you want to add it all. And a huge part of Oklahoma City's network lacks those radios and panels. So there's a lot of work in the Nokia markets that T-Mobile has to do. I've been told by another contact that they have a huge order with Nokia placed already. Of course, a huge chunk of the United States operates Nokia for T-Mobile, so that could just be the case. But I think they do expand and modernize more sites going into next year. And I think they kind of take that At&T strategy where, you know, we go to the site one time, we upgrade it, we do Band 71, and we add the rest of the, kind of like a rip and replace sort of, and we add everything else to it, and we take care of the software base stations. I think that's the kind of approach that T-Mobile is taking currently while they wait for this merger to potentially close. So I want to say all three networks have respectable coverage, of course. Verizon the best, At&T second, T-Mobile third, Sprint a way distant fourth. Natively, of course, with T-Mobile coverage, I guess they could claim that they have, you know, 50-60% more coverage or whatnot, but it's not native, so they're paying for it. So I think I think last year in my video I said that, you know, there may be some catching up from T-Mobile to At&T, but I think now at the end of 2019 going into 2020, we have more of a separation between the networks. So Verizon now has created a separation which AT&T is going to try to match. And as AT&T pulls away to try to match Verizon, T-Mobile is kind of going to fall behind a bit. Although they push more into 2020, they currently just don't have the capital funds to really expand to that type of footprint. And in a lot of areas, I gotta say it, that T-Mobile has expanded to, they are cutting corners. So instead of adding 2, 3, 4, 5 sites like all the other carriers do to add sufficient coverage, T-Mobile covers a 30, 40, 50 mile stretch using just one tower, or two, one on this end and the other on that end. So it'll present coverage, but it's not great coverage. It turns into fair coverage in most instances, which, if you guys have experienced fair coverage, it's almost like having no coverage. So the tower is just too far away. So indoors, or you put your phone in your pocket, it drops to no service. The data sessions time out in those instances. So there's just a lot of things going on at T-Mobile that they're trying to accomplish with so little funding. That's where the Sprint merger would help, but initially they're going to be sidetracked. They're going to have to start the integration process, which is going to take up a huge amount of the capital investment, and it's going to take time. So this concludes my end of year coverage comparison. I just wanted to show that to you guys. Let me know in the comment section down below what you guys think. Have you experienced in your area a huge gain of coverage on either carrier? Maybe you have AT&T, T-Mobile, or Verizon. Hell, maybe you have Sprint and they've experienced some sort of coverage gain in your area. Let us all know in the comment section down below. I just wanted to make this video for you guys today, like I usually do. We're almost into 2020. So definitely stay tuned to the channel. If you're new to the channel, make sure you like, share, subscribe. Also hit the notification bell so you're notified when I upload content like this. Also follow all of the Tech Life social media outlets for more updates. This is Tyrone with Tech Life, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.